How has technology changed our dating and sex lives? Is having a lot of matches on Tinder a good thing or not? And what about sex robots? Are they creepy, or are they a healthy way for people to find sexual expression? I'm Amanda Thomas, and you're listening to A Scientist Walks Into a Bar. In this podcast, we bring you recordings of talks by real scientists given at events called Science on Tap. Technology impacts our intimate relationships in ways far beyond just dating sites. If you're in a relationship, you might not think that's true, but consider this. Do you text each other throughout the day? Do you ever use one of those apps to see where your loved one is and if they're on their way home from work? What about when you're apart for a few days? Do you video chat? In this talk, we'll hear from sex researcher and author Dr. Kris Gowen, and she spoke at the Kagan's Theater in Vancouver, Washington in February 2018. She talked about some of the many ways technology affects our sex lives and some of the limitations on scientifically studying social trends like this when things change so fast. She also talks a lot about sex robots, not only about what they are, but she also describes some potential positive reasons why they're a good thing, as well as some possibly negative considerations too. Overall, it's a fascinating discussion of some of the ethics and challenges of incorporating technology into our intimate relationships. There were a lot of interesting questions from the audience, so we left them in at the end of the episode. Also, if you come to an event, you'll find out that we usually do trivia at the beginning as a sort of opening act. It's fun, but it makes for boring podcast audio, so we cut it out. However, the trivia questions are mentioned a few times, so I wanted to give some context. With that, here we go.
So, hi, welcome. And as Amanda was saying before, I had given this talk around 10 years ago, and it was sort of time for an update. 20 years ago, a little bit over 20 years ago, I started really getting interested in the ways that sex and relationships intersected with technology when I worked for a website for teens that's now defunct, where I was a sexpert. That's like the advice person for sex and relationships and stuff for a bunch of teenagers on AOL chat. So I was Dr. G on AOL chat, and then I started being asked to chaperone dances, like through AOL chat. And that consisted of people just sort of like, remember like putting the double colon around things, like to say that that was their activity. So they'd be like dancing to, insert artist here. And then someone would say, switching music, because that's really stupid. And then you would slowly start watching people go onto into the chat and then leaving as they were sort of pairing off, I think, and going off into other chat rooms to do other things, with each other and having a little bit of cyber sex. And that's when I started getting questions from the teenagers about, well, we just had cyber sex, now what? Are we dating? The person's not talking to me anymore. What do I do? I don't understand. And that really got me interested in this whole idea of, oh my goodness, like now what? How does technology impact the way that we relate to each other, the ways we meet each other? And so it's just been sort of a passion of mine ever since. And one of the things that I think about a lot in my work is whether having sex and or falling in love is a right or a privilege. And there are some sexual health bills of rights that have been written and crafted by various organizations. And one of the ones that has struck me the most is from the World Health Organization, which says that sexual health is a state of physical, mental, and social well-being in relation to sexuality. And that really it requires this positive and respectful approach, but it says that really that people should have the possibility of having pleasurable and safe sexual experiences. So I'd like to think about how can technology help in achieving this. So first of all, some of the good stuff. We use technology to enhance sex all the time. So for example, in pornography, which is a literal roadmap of sexual possibilities, in 2015, there were 21 billion visits to Pornhub. So not with a M, with a B. Billion visits. And there, people can search for the pornography of their choice by the size of a penis or the size of breasts, the amount of hair, whether they want their pornography to include balloons, condiments, furries, or unicorns, right? Like literally you can look for whatever you want. And it helps it can help you explore things that interest you. And then you can also use the internet to educate yourself. All your questions can be answered, maybe not as quality as you would like them to be, and sometimes that's a difficulty, but still, you can learn about sex online. And of course, you can also explore options when it comes to safer sex. But it goes beyond just looking up things on the internet. Ross Dawson is a scholar in this field, and he has a website called futureofsex.net. Futureofsex.com is a podcast, so it's just it's interesting. And actually, the two people who have these Future of Sex URLs supposedly get along, so they're not in some big fight over the URL and what it is. So I'm going to spend some time talking about robots, not so much, but a little bit about remote sex and virtual sex and augmentation, which includes things such as cyborgs, but also the notion that maybe one day we can use a 3D printer to print replicas of our lovers' genitals for when they're not around, right? Immersive entertainment, so where's pornography going today? So those are some of the things he's looking at. And so getting into some of these things a little bit more, we have remote sex, which used to be called something called teledildonics. Still is sort of related, but dildos is way too limiting, right? So we have sleeves and vibrators and dildos that are using what's called haptic technology. And some of you may be familiar with that term, but really what that means is that it uses vibrations to help actually mimic sensation. So you can use it to actually feel intimate with a partner across distance. So smart technology, smart vibrators, smart sleeves, using Bluetooth or online devices or apps, you can actually hook the sex toy to yourself, and then a partner can control it, no matter where they are. And so that's a thing. This is this one here, Kiro, K-I-I-R-O, they're sort of the leader in that. And so that's something that can be used with a Bluetooth device. And so you can do that. But you can also use it in virtual reality pornography. So where you can put on the glasses, like that lovely couple is down on the bottom, and you can put on other things, and you can actually have your device that is attached to you sort of work in time, right, with the actress or actor kind of thing, and that can be a thing. Also, you can enter virtual worlds. This is sort of the second life this is called Red Central, and you can create an avatar and you can have sex. And you can't really see it here, but here is some actions. So couple dancing, dance erotic, you can do a massage, standing sex, sex pose bondage, three-way sex. These are actually a drop-down menu of options you can choose from in Red Light Central. And then, of course, you have webcams. And webcams can be used one-on-one, or it can kind of create this mass intimacy where one person is looked upon and gazed upon by many. And those people can sort of chat in a chat box called Chatterbait. That's a thing. And you can look, and you can decide what sort of requests you can take from the people that are watching. So, all right, 21 billion visits in 2015. It's sometimes it's measured to be about 80 million a day. What is the impact of all of this in pornography? Well, the easy punchline is we have no idea. On one level, it really makes sense to think that it's harmful because a lot of things, just intuitively, common sense would say something to the effect of, Well, sex feels really, really good, and watching a lot of people have sex, therefore, must feel really, really good, and it's going to be addictive. Sex releases neurotransmitters in the brain, and just like drugs, so maybe it's addictive. Or a different type of common sense could say, well, maybe it just helps you with your sexual satisfaction, so it's cathartic. We can also say, really, if there's 21 billion visits a year, it can't be that harmful, otherwise our society would be in complete disarray. If everybody was negatively impacted by pornography, we'd probably be dead as a society at this point. And in fact, those places that have less restrictions on internet pornography, it's correlated that they have fewer sexual crimes. But again, the important part is this is all correlation. It's not causation. We don't know. Because we also do know that for certain people, it is harmful. That some people, when they watch a lot of pornography, it is associated with higher rates of violence. So really, all we can kind of say about all of this is that pornography and viewing pornography for those people especially is probably a symptom of something, but not the cause. And so that's kind of all we have, which isn't very satisfying to researchers. I tell you, it drives us nuts, right? For every study that you can see that says it causes harm, you can see this sort of a similar type study that says it doesn't do anything or it causes good. So sorry for that, no answers. That was a little bit of a breeze just on some intro stuff. I'm going to spend a chunk of time talking about sort of online dating and what we know about it, how it fits in current psychological theories, and sort of with maybe a couple tips on how you can maybe do it a little bit more effectively. So first of all, with online dating, and really, is there any other way to meet people at this point? There's this sort of comfort in knowing that there's all these people out there just like you who are alone, or at least sharing their loneliness and looking for others, right? I mean, there's so many things, and I'm going to give you some stats on that in a minute. But it's interesting that only 58% of people who are using online dating have actually gone out on a date from the online dating. And to me, that seemed a little low. So I kind of wanted to look at some of the reasons that maybe, what's up with the only 58%? So let's see. So here are two numbers. Those numbers are both very, very large numbers. The first one, 100 million, is the number of people who use online dating apps. And about half of those are Tinder. So Tinder is where a lot of people are. And those Tinder people create 1 billion swipes a day. So there you go. So does it work? Well, just because it's really, really easy to do it doesn't mean it's either efficient or effective. And so when we talk about efficient, people on average, according to Tinder, log in 11 times a day and spend on average 90 minutes. That's a lot of time every single day. And that's not dating, remember? That's just looking for a date, right? And then Tinder, of those billion swipes, boasts, and it sounds impressive, that they make 12 million matches every single day. But you know what that means? That means there's 986 million rejections every day, which is a little sad. So these poor people, 84% of them state they're looking for a romantic relationship. Now, mind you, it was one of those check all that apply, so they could also be looking for a hookup or something else. It just means it's not, the numbers added up to more than 100%. But 84% of people who use online dating and apps say they are looking for a romantic relationship. Yet only 17% report being in a long-term relationship as a result of a dating app. So not very efficient, not very effective. So maybe one of the problems is what the heck do we look for in a relationship? Let's just even take a step back. Forget the online dating stuff. What do we know from psychology about what people look for in a relationship? Well, one theory that a lot of people go for is evolutionary psychology. And this is very heterocentric, but it's sort of how us researchers sadly roll historically, and we're getting better. But one of the things is that traditionally, men would look for attractiveness, and women would look for earning potential. And that's because in Darwin evolutionary sort of mentality, a woman wants a guy that is sort of strong and can earn a lot of money and help care for a kid. And a guy is like, well, I have the ability to earn and do all that. I just want my kids to look good, like me. So I just want the woman to look good too, so my genes are portrayed in the best way absolutely possible. So that's what, and it actually pans out in the research. If you ask somebody, what are you looking for in a mate? Heterosexual women tend to say earning potential, and they rate it pretty high. And men tend to say, I want someone who looks good. The funny part is that just because we say that's what we think we want, it totally doesn't pan out when we actually start dating somebody. So both are important, but the gender differences go away completely. And we also are relatively realistic. If we rate ourselves about a 5, we date people that are like a 4, a 5, or a 6. Like, we just end up dating somebody who's really in our attractiveness wheelhouse, if you will. So, evolutionary psychology makes us think we're looking for something in relationships, but the reality doesn't pan out. And what I find actually even more interesting is that if you ask people who are single, this is the second bullet point, what they think they want in a partner, list the things that you really think you want. You ask them in advance, and then you check in on them like 3 months later, 6 months later, and you see if they're actually dating somebody. Totally doesn't match. Totally, like, there is no correlation between what someone said they wanted in a partner and who they actually end up dating. So we can't even predict ourselves what we think is important. Now, I thought it was funny, as a control for this, they use cereal. So they also ask people, what do you want in a cereal? Do you want marshmallows? Do you want it sweet, crunchy, fiber, no fiber? And we're very good at predicting what cereal we're gonna buy. So when we say we want a sweet marshmallowy cereal, we buy sweet marshmallowy cereal. We got a box of Lucky Charms in our cupboard. However, if we say we want a person who is whatever, funny and tall and blonde hair or whatever, we end up dating like this really serious, brooding, dark-haired person. It doesn't even match up at all. To me, I found that completely fascinating, that we don't even know what we want. And one of the reasons for this, there's something called decision fatigue, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard about this. A few years ago, there was a book written called The Paradox of Choice. And what it shows is that the more choices we have, the crappier we are at actually making a good decision. For me, I have a couple stories with this, but one is I lived overseas for a while. And when I got back to the States, one of the hardest things it was for me to do as I was trying to reacclimate, it's called reverse culture shock, is when I went to a grocery store and I stared at the 20 ketchups that I could choose from. I literally didn't know what to do. And the first day that I went back, I actually had my cart and I just left. I bought 0 things. The ketchup aisle, I just had this weird meltdown. I was like, I can't even do it. And I just went out. There was too many choices. We actually have a lot of studies that show us that more options does not equate into better choices for a few reasons. One is this overwhelming nature of things. So a couple studies have shown, for example, that, like you go to some grocery store and you get to sample stuff in hopes you'll buy it. Well, they had some examples where there'd be like 6 jams or 30 jams. And with your 6, you might actually be less likely to go over to the thing. You're like, 6, maybe I'll try. But you're more likely to walk away from it. The trick is when you have those 6 choices, you're actually more likely to try them and then buy one as a result, As opposed to 30, you're like, dude, 30 jams, that's amazing. I'm gonna try all of them and stuff. And then you're like, whoa, and then you just walk away and you don't buy anything. It's too much. So they did a similar study too with asking students in college if they wanted extra credit. And they said yes. And when they gave them 6 choices of essays they could write about, they were more likely to do the extra credit and actually do it better, like a higher quality essay. When you gave them more options, the essays were more poorly written and fewer people were actually likely to do them. So too many choices actually can be a bad thing and cause you to make poor decisions or just less likely to make a decision at all. And part of that reason might be because if there's too many choices, like all those people on Tinder, you're gonna wanna look for that perfect person. If there's so many people out there, 100 million of them, remember, one of them's gotta be the person for me, as opposed to focusing on, this person looks pretty cool, maybe I should give them a chance. So you kind of get into this weird decision thing. Another thing that happens with decision fatigue is that we forget what's important. And again, I have a personal story with this. It involves vacuum cleaners. So I needed a small cordless vacuum cleaner so I could get the dust stuff off my hardwood stairs. So I went to Target, and there was a whole wall of small vacuum cleaners. I was like, oh God. So I looked at price and color, and then I looked and I was like, do I want the canister or the bag? What attachments do I want? Oh my God. And finally I was like, God damn it, okay. Vacuum cleaner, got one, it was blue, it was nice. I get it home, I open it, it had a cord. And remember, what I did was I went there looking for a small cordless vacuum cleaner, and the one that I finally decided on had a cord. Because I got too distracted by all the other kinds of features. So now you can think of that in terms of looking for a partner. And so people who study this stuff, this decision fatigue and everything, would tell those Tinder users who are looking at it 11 times a day and whatever, no more than 6. 6 swipes, that's it. Maybe choose someone out of those 6, maybe not, but don't do this, because you're gonna end up with your vacuum cleaner with a cord if you do that. So that's just one of the things that you're gonna do. And that's just not gonna be what you want. You're gonna sit in front of that person and go, I didn't wanna date you. Why am I even here? Like, what happened? I know I chose you, but that's not, no. Crap, all right, whatever. So if none of these things actually seem to work, what's next in online dating? Side note, by the way, eHarmony's scientific matching thing, they're actually technically not supposed to say it's scientifically accurate anymore because it also doesn't do bupkis to help you predict anything. So it's based in scientific theories, so they can sort of get away with still saying scientific, but it's, as we just said, all these scientific theories are not panning out in the long run. So this is John Gottman. I met him at a wedding once, and one of my friends, I was texting her, was like, oh my God, John Gottman's at a wedding. She's like, are you taking a picture? I'm like, I just can't. But he's a wonderful, brilliant psychologist who has been studying success in partnerships. And one of the things that's absolutely remarkable, I know you can't read this, I just have the infographic, but here, Dr. Gottman is able to predict with over 90% accuracy which couples will divorce and which ones will stay together. He can do it by putting a couple in a room and having them discuss a problem for 10 minutes. And so one of the things he has is these 4 horsemen, and they are contempt, defensiveness, stonewalling, and criticism. And it's sort of like the more you use these strategies in arguing with people, he can predict basically 5.6 years after the wedding, you're kaput if you have too many of those. If it's just that you're a little less nice to each other and supportive, you'll last 16.2 years. That's the other one under there. But so he can do that. So what some online dating services are starting to try to do is say, let's get potential people over like Skype or something and watch them talk to each other, and then we'll give this algorithm and tell them like just run, or, oh, that person's actually using like the right kinds of critical, whatever. So they're working on that kind of stuff to see what would be next in online dating. Another one, of course, and not surprisingly, is let's just meet up in Second Life or some virtual reality sort of first to see if we want to do anything. So those are kind of some things that I think are interesting in terms of what's coming up in the world of online dating, and maybe using some of Gottman's strategies that are so disturbingly, frankly, effective in face-to-face conversations can actually be applied. So stay tuned. And while you're waiting, you can download an interactive app. So the movie Her, in which Joaquin Phoenix, one of the Phoenixes, right? He falls in love with Siri, essentially. Well, that you can do that today if you want. You can fall in love with Siri. But her name is Harmony, and she's an app you can buy on subscription. Those of you who are interested in males have to wait. That one's still in development. But you can create an avatar, and you can also, this little bee honeycomb matrix is the personalities. And you can weight the personality characteristics of the person. So you can craft your artificial intelligent voice on your phone to talk to you in a personality that you desire, and that can be your friend for a little while or more. Or you can program the person to talk dirty to you. You can, so that's a thing that you can do. And they are working Real Dolls, which is one of the more famous, like, realistic dolls, like Lars and the Real Girl, for those of you who saw that movie and stuff. So they're working on putting the Harmony app into a robot head that can go onto a real doll. So that's going on. And like I said, for those of you who are more interested in men, the male version of that is still in development. So, which brings me to the sex robots. So we're getting really close to being able to build and then / customize order your mate. The upper right-hand corner, of course, is Ryan Gosling, and that's Joy, his holographic girlfriend. And over here, this is Samantha. Samantha's, I think she's on the market, or she's available for pre-order. What makes Samantha a little bit different than some of the others is she's programmed to have emotional reactions. She's also programmed to have an orgasm, and they put a G-spot in her. So either this is the greatest idea ever or a really bad idea for people who have performance anxiety issues that they can't even get the robot to come, like, kind of thing. But it's there. It's there. The other thing is interesting, too, is Samantha has family mode. So normally Samantha's personality, her artificial intelligence, has quite a randy, little spunky personality, but she actually has a family mode for more public or gatherings with over Thanksgiving. Back to the Lars and Real Girl. So those are the kinds of things people are thinking of when they're looking at this. They're recognizing that some people who will end up with having a robot as a companion, they're going to want that time where they're not always sexually on, but just actually, on as in the switch is flipped on. Which kind of brings us to this kind of question, like, what the heck is a sex bot or a sex robot? Like, what makes a device qualify as a sex bot? And those in the know kind of came up with this 4 criteria. And they're arguable. They're totally debatable. But the first is a human form. Now, I guess you could not have it as a human form. You could have it as a toaster or an animal or a stormtrooper or something. Like, you could have it like that, kind of human-esque form. But they do agree that it should have human-like behavior, including movement, and then artificial intelligence, so it's not just a static toy or something. It's more of a something you could converse with, and it could converse back with you, so you can have some form of verbal communication. But the thing that would make it a sex bot as opposed to just a robot that you may or may not have sex with is that its sole or at least main purpose would be sexual gratification. So that's sort of how people conceptualize the idea of what this would be. And this is, by the way, this is Gia. And she is also available on the market. She can speak. She is known for having really good facial expressions and micro expressions, moving her lips and bodies. And you can order which personality type you want. You can't adjust it like you can with the Harmony app, but you can set preferences for the personality type. I think there's 12. Clearly, if we're going to develop sex robots, people probably better want to have sex with a robot. Otherwise, this is going to go the way of Betamax and other failed devices. So according to that Singles in America survey, which is a survey of about 5,000 people, 31% of men and 15% of women said they would have sex with a robot. And then the other thing was about 50%, and it was a little bit higher for men, interestingly enough, than women said that you would be cheating if you had sex with a robot and you were dating somebody else. The research on this is pretty scant. There was one group of researchers out of Tufts University that did 2 studies about other attitudes and things that people would have about sex with robots. It's a pretty biased sample. Both times the sample came from people who are really high in the tech industry, because maybe they answer those questions. One was at a conference, so I think they just did a convenience sampling. So they asked them, like, what are the benefits of a sex robot? Well, a lot of people kind of pick the obvious, but sex is available at any time. But I also thought it was interesting that a very high number said there was no psychological pain to the robot. So you wouldn't hurt the robot's feelings, right? Or you wouldn't have to worry about, does the robot like it this way? Did I last long enough for the robot? Too short, too long, whatever, right? Like the robot's not gonna be bummed out after you have sex with it. So they thought that was good. And then you don't feel bad, right? About half thought it would improve sex life, maybe with a partner, or just because now they have someone to have sex with, and possibly better orgasms. I'm assuming for them and not the robot. Unless it's Samantha. So what are the concerns that people have? Well, they're concerned that it might actually harm some face-to-face relationships that they have. And it might also create unrealistic expectations about some of the relationships that they might have face-to-face. They are also concerned, it's interesting though, even though it's got this, I find a little bit of a contradiction, but maybe not too much, but that creating unrealistic expectations, which is at about 2/3, yet 40% say that emotional bonds might form. So they're not as concerned about that, but nevertheless, it's still a substantial. And they also are a little afraid that the robots might feel too good and stuff, and they might not want to go back to a physical partner. Interestingly enough, only 6% thought that the robots would actually end up taking over the world. What else do people think? This is kind of interesting. I don't know. Having sex with a robot does not violate any law. Now, somewhat contradictory, only 19%, I did not put this on the slide, 19% of people, which is still 1 in 5, said it would be socially acceptable to have a robot that looked like a child. And similar to the 71% is that you can't rape a robot. So sort of looking at these blurry lines of where things may or may not cause concerns. About half thought that people could fall in love with a sex robot, but yet, as you remember, only 40% thought that emotional bonds would form. So, welcome to surveys. So, a little bit of a discrepancy there. This group of a bit fewer thought that one couldn't cheat on a human with a sex robot. And then people would treat robots like human lovers. So there's a little bit of contradictions and stuff. And again, they did 2 surveys at 2 different times, but they were so remarkably similar that I just reported on the most recent one. All these responses really went like within a couple percentage points of each other at each time that they did the survey. So in addition to having sex with a sex robot, like duh, but what are some of the other possible benefits? Well, one is maybe we could use them for education. We could, as in sex therapy, or just in like adult sex ed classes or things like that we can actually use these robots to teach maybe a little bit more about anatomy, or maybe about pleasure, or about role playing or something. I mean, it's possible that these robots could be used in a variety of ways, not just personal use. They also could be used to support those with certain disabilities, whether those are intellectual disabilities and people who might not have the intellectual capacity to have a relationship with another human being, or you could maybe even design these robots to help people with certain physical limitations have sex in certain positions that they wouldn't normally be able to have because there's a robot. And so offering those options as a sexual outlet. And clearly, one of the other benefits, I didn't put it on the slides there, but a lot of people point out, is that robot sex is safer sex. So no STI transmission, no concern about pregnancy, things like that. Although it's interesting because Sophia, that robot in Saudi Arabia, actually, they programmed her artificial intelligence, and in an interview once, she said it might be nice to settle down and have a family. So she got that from somewhere, I don't know where. So now, people might be willing to have sex with a robot. Can we have a relationship with a robot? And this is Sophia. There she is again. There's a couple indications that maybe the answer is yes. There's also some no, and that's coming up in a little bit. But there's the computers as social actors theory, and they did a lot of studies that showed that a computer can end up flattering, persuading, and cajoling, and even irritating their users by using certain languages, and then people would have certain emotional responses to those things. So for example, a helpful computer can get a person to help it more. So if the computer's nice, right, and says nice things, a person will actually stay longer to run some tests. So one of the experiments was like having a computer that was totally rude, one that had a flat affect, and one that was like, why, thank you for your help, and would like voice that. And it would just say, you're done with the experiment, but if you could like do a couple more things here and stay for a few more questions, it would really help me. And the nicer the computer program was, the longer people stayed to answer questions with no additional benefit. Similarly, they used some computers to do some tutoring, and if the person evaluated the tutoring service on the same computer, they ranked and evaluated those services higher than if they answered the same questions on either a piece of paper or at another computer. It was like they didn't want to hurt the computer's feelings if they didn't rate the tutoring very high. And so there's a lot of evidence, and a lot of this evidence was actually done in the 90s when the computers were kind of these big boxes and the voices weren't that real. I mean, it didn't take much, let's put it this way, for us humans to sort of put this social actor, like niceties, our social niceties, and project them onto a computer, no matter how primitive. So, can we have a relationship with a robot? Maybe. But then what does it mean to be in a relationship with somebody? And there's a million theories about this, everything from Buber's I and thou, so like the notion that there's an I and a you, the thou, and that you don't want to be completely enmeshed. You want to have separation yet togetherness. This is Sternberg's triangle, which you might remember from your Psych 101 class if you went to college. And Sternberg argued that there were three components to love and liking. And they are intimacy, so feeling close to another psychologically, passion, which is sort of your sexual drive and your sexual attraction, and then commitment. And commitment doesn't mean monogamy necessarily, it just means that you're on the same page when it comes to what it means to be somehow invested in the relationship. And so in Sternberg land, and you could argue this, that the ideal consummate love is sort of equal parts these three things. But what is also important is that the shape of my triangle, in order to be in a successful relationship, needs to match the shape of the triangle of my partner. So if I'm really, really interested in high levels of intimacy, passion's really important for me, but maybe not so much commitment, then my partner better feel the same way in order to have a successful relationship. And so those three components need to not only all be there, but that also they need to match my partners. And so using theories like this, anything from the I and thou to Sternberg's triangle to everything, requires a binary relationship. And with a robot, it's just not there. Interestingly enough, though, we can say, and this is down here, it's the fatuous love, that's passion and commitment. Some people argue that we can have those kinds of relationships with robots the same way we are in love with our phones. We love our phone. Or like the same way that I love the San Jose Sharks, the hockey team, or any other sports team. We can love certain things, but sadly they do not love us back. So all of this, should we embrace having a relationship with a sex bot? They can't love us back. We don't really know what the implications are in things. This is down here. Those of you may or may not know, this is Dave Cat. That's what he goes by. The kind of love he practices is called synthetic love. That's his partner of over 20 years, Salona, who's a real doll. He's had her replaced, I think, 3 times, but it's still the same entity to him, and he's been dedicated to, he has a girlfriend too, who is another real doll, but all 3 of them get along, and they live in the same house, and he is committed to his girlfriend and to his spouse. I mean, it's not a legal marriage, but he considers himself married to Salona. And so they've been together over 20 years, and so he would believe that we should embrace having relationships with sex bots. But this brings up a lot of ethical issues, and one of them is consent. As we develop these artificial intelligences, and they get more and more sophisticated, would there ever be a time when the robot would say, I'm not in the mood. No, thank you. And you're like, but I paid a lot of money for you for this very reason. And now you get into these issues that we talk about in our face-to-face relationships. Like, what do we do in those situations? How much and how good is this artificial intelligence we're going to be developing? Well, one of the ways to get around that is to literally program the robot to obtain its happiness from our happiness. That its pleasure comes from our pleasure. Like, that would literally be something that we could do. And therefore, consent would sort of become a non-issue. There would never have to be a negotiation because the robot was literally built and put on this planet for you and your needs and your drives. So when your drive was low, the robot didn't care. And when your drive was high, your robot was there for you. And so it is possible that that could be the way we program it to please it that way. Another concern that some people have in ethical considerations is that we might end up shifting societal norms and expectations. If we can create these robots that consent whenever we want to have sex, well, then what does that do if we try to start having a face-to-face relationship? Is it going to become more difficult? Are we going to sort of forget and lose our skills with how to ask and negotiate and navigate those kinds of things in a relationship? It's possible, but we just simply don't know yet. Other societal norms and expectations are things related to body image and stuff like that, because these robots can be customized to fit your ideal. So you can make it look exactly how you want someone to look. And if you get tired of that boob size, and yes, most sex robots at this point have female anatomy, you can swap them out. It costs you money, but you can swap them out. Oh, I don't feel like red hair anymore. I want dark hair. Done. I want this robot to gain a little bit of weight. Done. I want the robot to lose a little weight. Done. Bigger butt, smaller butt, bigger feet, little feet, whatever. You can totally customize it to the way you want it. And so how is that going to mess with our societal expectations, which arguably kind of suck right now as it is, about how people are supposed to look? And again, sort of looking at our societal expectations of what isn't and isn't okay when it comes to who can be a sexual or romantic partner. If we can make this doll look like whatever we want, an animal, a child, stormtrooper, whatever. So it's all these things we just don't know. We don't know the answers to these things, and we don't have any research that can predict any of this. I hope, if anything, if you leave here with one thing, is that the research we have about understanding what makes a partner and a relationship last and stuff, with the exception of the Gottman stuff, it's just a big stinking question mark. And how the internet impacts our, pornography and those sorts of things impact our psyche and well-being when it comes to sex and sexuality, that also comes up with nothing definitive. Like, we just don't really have anything. So I just want to close with sort of this quote, and then also just this sort of diagram, which is overly simplistic. But I think what it shows is that we're rapidly approaching this point where man and machine are merging. That even if we think we have a pure face-to-face relationship with somebody, we kind of really don't, because we text them, or we Skype with them when they're on a business trip, or something to that effect. And so that impacts, like that sneaks in the virtual. Or we use technology. We might use a sex toy in the bedroom, or something to that effect. And so we might have it be primarily face-to-face, or we might have it primarily virtual, or we might have it primarily technological, but it's really, really difficult to make it all or nothing in something like this. I mean, it's possible that here we could have a technological one if we end up having a relationship with a robot. And it is possible that it's all virtual if you meet someone in Second Life and never meet face-to-face. That said, if you then use one of those haptic Kiro dildos or sleeves or something like that, now you're in here, right? You're in this little area. And then face-to-face, same thing, right? Virtual if you text, technological if you use one of those sex toys or something like this. And if you combine all three, well, then you're in this little center thing here. But ultimately, what comes down to is that while we live in these overlaps, really, we can't ultimately have a sex servant, like a sex robot, and a relationship, like a true relationship. And we can't have companionship without risk or the demands and listening to another person. And that really, when it comes down to it, love, our lives and everything are never gonna be completely emotionally safe. And that we're gonna need to be a little bit vulnerable when it comes to these sorts of things and thinking about it. Until then, you can always put Samantha on pre-order. Thank you.
Thank you. I am going to start off with a question here. If I meet somebody online and I have cyber sex with them, and then we meet up in person after that, is there any kind of research about the disinhibition effect and how that might change our interaction?
So not that I've found in that sense, like if it's the transition from sort of virtual relationship into face-to-face relationship is really not known at all. I mean, so one of the sad parts is research takes stinking forever to reach publication, to reach anything like that. Anyone who's a researcher knows that it takes on average about 10 years for a study to happen and then actually ending up in the press or in a publication or something. And 10 years in technology years is 50. So there are still studies, for example, about social networking and things like that are still we surveyed 300 people in MySpace. And exactly, we all go, ha ha, you're cute. But yet that's all we have. And so this idea of what happens in the virtual world and then what happens in the personal, my advice essentially though is that consent needs to happen at every stage of every relationship at every moment at every time. So just because you had sex in some virtual world, you absolutely need to navigate it in your face-to-face relationship, and you also need to navigate it in your face-to-face relationship every time in your face-to-face relationship. So
My question is more on a serious note. In your professional opinion, do you think that incorporating robots more would either decrease or increase the amount of sex crimes we have?
On that weird, sort of like back to how pornography impacts, there's that that sort of side of my common sense that says, yes, but most of the data that looks more at things on a global level or an epidemiological level and things all dictate no. That said, having sex with a sex robot is different, I think, but we don't really know, than viewing pornography because it's more intimate, it's more physical of an interaction. So my prediction would probably be no, because the more sexually free and the more sexual options that we ultimately give a society, the less violent it is. So I think I would go to that, but I would definitely be open to being wrong.
Over here on your left in the front.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. I have always found the behavior known as catfishing to be very interesting, and I'm kind of interested in psychology and that kind of thing, but I wondered if there's any, I understand it's something inherently difficult to study formally, but is there anything that your field, I guess, has to say about the phenomenon of catfishing, anything like that?
I didn't see anything. Oh,
Actually,
go ahead.
for those of you who don't know, I'm going to ask you to describe what catfishing is.
So catfishing is when you are like a fake person. So you meet this person who's too good to be true. Their picture's perfect. They're totally looking for someone just like you, and you're doing all these things. And they sort of they use similar strategies to the way people use online predators use to groom children. So they start slowly. They say, "Oh, I understand you like no other." It's all this stuff, and then, "Oh, by the way, I'm short on cash. Do you have a little bit, this or all these things?" And it turns out the person's like not real at all. They're totally fake, and it's all these things. I didn't look a lot on catfishing specifically, but I haven't come across anything. And so again, it's these phenomena that are happening so quickly, and I mean, similar to like ghosting. Like, we don't have any impact. We can imagine what the impact of ghosting would have on a person, but we don't actually have any sort of measurements on it.
Hi, and I'm actually in school for mental health counseling, so I find this to be really interesting. So I'm wondering if you think that these robots can also be programmed to provide psychological needs for people in addition to the sexual needs.
Yeah. Well, so this talk was about sex robots and things like that. That said, they're really working on developing the artificial intelligence of these robots. I saw a couple demo videos, and sometimes they really miss. So there was this one funny one that my partner and I, who's a flesh and blood person, were looking at a video, and it was something like, "Do you like sports?" And the person said, "I have a vocabulary of 30,000 words." And they're like, and then it sort of came back and said, "What team do you like?" Which was on point. And the guy said Cincinnati Reds, and they responded with, "I like milkshakes," or something. It was totally just off topic. And so I could see then that actually being really, really bad in a mental health counseling session. If the person sounds like they're quote unquote not listening or not programmed to actually understand the question, never mind the nuances, right? As a mental health professional, you're trained to look at somebody, see if they're tearing up or see when something is. I think we're so far away from that I can't imagine that happening anytime soon. But that's just me.
Hi, so I noticed that a lot of the concerns that people had about sex bots seem similar to concerns that I've seen people have about pornography, like in problems with relationships or having unrealistic expectations. Yeah. So I'm just wondering if you think that with sex bots, as they become more prevalent in society in general, will the research be completely inconclusive like it seems to be for pornography as far as the effect, or if it's such a different phenomenon that'll be pretty tangible, the results of research?
I think it's going to be the first thing as you're describing it. I think it's going to be just as stinking complicated, that certain people first of all, it's sort of will having sex with a non-human entity be as common as viewing pornography? Right now, sex robots and real dolls and stuff, they're stinking expensive, right? Pornography's cheap and super accessible and anonymous and all these things. To get a sex robot, well, first of all, it's not anonymous because it's a credit card, it's delivered to your house, so we lose that. It's thousands of dollars right now, so it's not what everybody has. So you're already getting a select amount of people. So who are those people? And are those the people who see pornography to enhance relationships, or are those the people who view pornography and have complications as a result? We don't know, and we wouldn't be able to really tell what the impact of a sex robot or a sex doll would be on people until it's much more widespread, and that would require serious discounts on the technology.
So the supply chain side of me wants to know about recycle, upcycle, reuse, Craigslist, all these things that say that it'll be safer to have sex with a sex doll, but if it's $1,000 and you upgrade the things and you sell it on Craigslist, it might not be the safest thing if it's being reused.
Yeah. Good question, and a very Portland question, so good on you. I never saw anything about that. They're mostly made of silicone, so that in terms of the material being used and things like that. The other thing that I did know is that in the case with Dave Cat, the doll wore out a few times, and so there were a couple ways that you could bring the doll in to be serviced to get it sort of skin tightened up and things like that again. But sometimes it's just done, and you need to get a new body. So that said, with Craigslist, I mean, in the same way that silicone sex toys can be cleaned and things like that, you would just want to use the same kind of cleaning techniques and make sure that they were clean as well before you used it again.
Hi. I just have a quick question. Not sure I'm going to phrase this right, but don't you think also sex robots probably exacerbate the idea of perfection too, of what if you can build everything, doesn't give people the false perception of what real is real?
Well, that actually, so there's a little bit more concrete data on the impact of media viewing and that altering our expectations of what body images and things like that should look like. So women who, and again, it's correlational though, it's not causation, that women who look at women's magazines more are more likely to feel that they're falling short in an ideal. We're also, because of a lot of ethical considerations and concerns, we don't know for sure what the impact of young people viewing pornography is. And so it's sort of a parallel in that so if we shape our expectations when we're young based on this sort of not reality, because people, pornography is obviously acting, but so learning about pornography or learning about sex by watching pornography would be sort of akin to actually trying to learn how to drive by watching Fast and Furious movies. You'd get some of it right, but probably not. Or it would be akin to trying to learn how to ski by watching the Olympics, right? Like these people who practice day in and day out and do this all the time, and you're like, oh, skiing's just like this. And they can go boop, 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 like down the little slalom thing. No, right? So in that same way, if we sort of start out with sex robots, it might actually skew our view of how things actually should be and the way they would be. But again, I don't know if that's perfectly translatable.
So I realize this is probably a loaded question, but I mean, one theme you could say from your talk is that, we're getting into more of a technology-based society, so people will naturally reach out to technology to satisfy needs, and that's where you get maybe some of the quadrants of satisfying yourself selfishly with technology. But if you're a quote-unquote normal person looking for a quote-unquote normal relationship, could you not say that part of the theme of your talk is that still the best way to do that is in person?
Yeah, well, I'm an advocate for face-to-face, for relationships to have some face-to-face component. So that is definitely a bias of mine. Does it need to be exclusively face-to-face? No. I believe that relationships can also sustain over distance using various ways that work with that partner. And so it's ultimately one of those, it depends. And I think that is the point of my talk. I mean, it's sort of two things. Is one, to show that what we know in research does not match up to what is actually happening. So we don't have many answers, which is exceedingly frustrating. That said, there are some fundamentals that we do know, which is that it's easier to hide behind like an online personality. It's easier to pretend you're someone you're not. It's also easier to say things to somebody behind the computer. And that could be good or bad, right? That could be either you suck and whatever, like online bullying. But it also could be good because it could actually give that person the courage to say something like, I love you, when they couldn't do it face to face at first. And it just helps build up courage. So I'm not exactly answering your question, but I am showing my bias that I think relationships should have some face-to-face component. But I also think that given what our technology is, it's not very realistic to think a face-to-face relationship is ever going to be 100% face-to-face, and that people who have healthy relationships can work with technology to help their relationships and improve them in a lot of different ways.
This kind of ties to one of the trivia questions that Amanda had, like, you know, the film camera gets made in 1895, and by 1896, we're making porn. Same thing, it seems the same thing with the VCR. The VCR is in the home, and suddenly every mom and pop shop has the curtain in the back. Internet, there's pay-for pornography sites before there's Amazon. Is there any studies that show that this is sort of a necessary component before we start actually having robots for things that could be like home nursing care or fixing your car or something like that? And that's, in other words, do we have to leap through the lowest denominator of human evolution before we get to something more useful?
Yeah, I have no business experience, so, you know, with that, but it does seem that people are willing to buy sex things. I think it's I had it cheated on my card, I can't remember, but I think sex toys, for example, is a $15 billion industry. And so we have used the sex industry as a experimental universe to try to figure out what we can and can't do. So virtual reality, for example, there's a lot of really fun, not sexual at all games that you could use with virtual reality goggles. But that said, a lot of the huge advances are going into virtual reality porn. And so a lot of people are taking that science into where can we make money, and then we can maybe use it for other things. But again, I say this as someone with a PhD in child and adolescent development and in human development and psychology. I have 0 MBA, so.
Yeah, hello. I'm curious about the use of avatars kind of as technology, and whether that is in a virtual world where people can take on different personalities or different body types, etc., or whether that's the use of like sex robots in a remote sex sort of way, where maybe somebody is controlling a sex robot remotely. Yeah. And if you've looked into those technologies or seen anything in that area.
So we're way far away from people being able to control a sex robot, like, because there's barely sex robots. You can go on YouTube and stuff and see, and Google and see how far the technology is. And like I said, when I went to the websites to like see, most of them were sort of on pre-order, and there was just that big, I know someone in this audience is gonna know, but just earlier this month or late last month, there was that huge computer tech show. And I swear, like, I had this talk put together, and then that show came out, and I'm like, dang it, there's like all these sex robot articles now, and they're all like, oh, I really literally almost had to redo the whole sex robot thing, like within like the last week. And so, but that said, all of that stuff is pre-order, it's in beta, it's barely out. So being able to control that, not close. 10 years ago, I spent a little bit more time talking about relationships in Second Life. And there are people who get married in Second Life, they have Second Life spouses, or they have Second Life partners, and then they have like a face-to-face partner, and they sort of negotiate it like a polyamorous kind of relationship, but just with different modes. I didn't see anything. We barely have any research on just face-to-face polyamory, never mind things like with avatars and stuff. So it's impossible for me to tell like where anything is in that, and I haven't seen anything.
Hi. So as a historian, I can't help but connect this to older forms that I'm thinking of when I think of sex dolls. So as soon as you started talking about the issue of consent, I immediately started thinking of historic prostitution, of men playing out sexual fantasies with prostitutes because they don't have to deal with the issue of consent. Right. And now you see that there's this sex industry and sex dolls that are shockingly being targeted towards men and male sexuality and no consent. So I've heard a couple women in this audience saying, do you think that this is going to encourage violence against women? Because we have seen historically that is, when you try to get rid of consent, right, that's typically what it's targeting towards. So even if sex robots aren't going to lead towards that, isn't it sort of questionable that trying to get rid of that consent is something that we should be considering and being worried about? Yeah.
So there's a lot in that question. I want to start unpacking. So one of the things that was said is like with sex work, that takes away consent. And I want to say that that's not true. So yeah, but so like what I just meant for the general. So I know you were like question short, like thing, but so just because someone pays to have sex with a person doesn't mean it's like anything goes, right? There's money exchange for negotiation of something that can happen or maybe can't happen. And so that's an issue. And I think it's similar that people who pay money for sex, some people do it in sort of a, you know, in a benign way, and that's how they get sex for whatever reason. They can't find a partner. It's just they're more free to express the types of sex that they want to have without and they feel better with the monetary exchange. And then some because of a violent tendency. So I think it's going to be like that pornography where certain people end up having that more violent nature pulled out of them if sex robots become a little bit more ubiquitous. Some people have suggested that we should just turn all sex workers into sex robots. Like that is where we should put them, because then there isn't that issue of consent. But then that does make it concerning for me, because then those people don't learn the importance of consent if that's possible. The other thing too is most of my work is actually with youth, and Oregon is making this huge push to make it mandatory to teach consent in schools. And that consent is like this exceedingly important thing. And so, in fact, we added a lesson to a mandatory not a mandatory sixth grade curriculum, but a sixth grade curriculum that meets the standards of Oregon. And there's a whole lesson on consent for sixth graders. So consent is exceedingly important. And so we need to teach people who are just new to this negotiation of relationships how important consent actually is.
Hello.
Hi.
So we keep talking about this, and we're talking about is like, will this benefit people? Will it not? Will it benefit society? Will it not? Will it be negatives or positives? Yeah. So in thinking about that, my assumption is that there is a portion of the population, a percentage of people that just want to get off. Like that's their one drive above anything else. And why we're having problems in society is because there's a mismatch between people who want to get off and no outlet for that. And so I have a two-part question. One, am I right? Is there a percentage of people that just want to get off? And how do you feel like this sex bot situation would deal with that?
So that's a question I never really thought about. So my assumption is yes, because because sex drive is just on this huge, massive continuum. It also varies within a person, of course, but some people, identify as asexual or aromantic, and they just don't really have a sex drive, and that's sort of how they negotiate and navigate their lives. And other people are just totally on the other side, where that is where they achieve their utmost pleasure and things. Sex addiction is debated in the sort of the psychological community. Is it really sex addiction, or is it just more a manifestation of like obsessive compulsive disorder and things like that? But that said, yeah, I think a sex robot could help somebody who feels that need to have a lot of sex a lot of times, and masturbation is something. Because like with a sex doll, it's sort of like, I mean, this is semantic, but you're having sex to a sex doll. You're not having sex with a sex doll. And so at what point with robots, as we get more and more sophisticated, is there ever going to be a time where we say, I'm having sex with this robot? And I think, to me, that would mean, and this is more philosophical than scientific, but that would mean the robot could say no and you would respect that. That's when you start having sex with the robot. And so, can those dolls or a robot help a person who just wants to get off all the time? As long as they're, unless they're a trust fund kid, but as long as they're like going to work and having relationships and stuff, like I say with everything, as long as you're able to interact and have other parts of your life, yeah, go for it, Like that could be totally fine.
Hi, I'd love your thoughts on this.
Thanks.
One thing that struck me was how much investment, how much energy as a society we put into sex robots and pornography, and so little into giving people a chance to have a really successful, satisfying sex life. That just how little education is geared towards knowing the skills and how to really experience pleasure. And I also find it striking that whenever I read about sex robots, they can work with people therapeutically. But surrogates have been around, sexual surrogates, since the 60s or 70s, and that never really took off. I mean, most psychologists were very wary of using surrogates, as many people that are trained. So I just find it interesting how this is going to solve all these problems, but we're not using some other methods. So robots or no robots, I feel like people should have a chance to do it really good with each other.
Well, I'm a member of the Oregon Youth Sexual Health Partnership, and one of the things that we really struggle with when we look at sexuality education is the fear of teaching young people that sex has pleasure associated with it, which of course is kind of an important component of sex. And it's really sad, actually, if we somehow manage to navigate through life and realize that sex sex is supposed to be pleasurable. It's not like this thing that we just do and we pray we don't get an STI or pregnancy when it's like unplanned. That's what, so, which is also why we have a hard time in schools teaching about oral sex and anal sex and things like that, because ultimately those are for pleasure. Those aren't for procreation. Never mind people who get together and don't want to have a kid, or they're two men or two whatever. But so it's just such a challenge, and we're so far away from it in schools. And then as far as surrogates go too, because there's this ethical thing about psychologists can't have sexual relationships with their clients for good reasons, except for sex surrogacy, then it's a horrible reason, because then it's a problem, and I'm not saying that the relationship would be that, it's a different kind and it's complicated, and you probably know much more about it than I do, but I think that's another barrier, is that because we have these rules set up and all these things, and just unpacking how we view sex in our lives and things like that, that it's just, we're so far away from getting anywhere. I wish we were closer, but just working in this field for 25 years, I sometimes feel like I'm asking the same freaking questions that I was asking when I started 25 years ago about how to make stuff better.
Well, with that, let's say thank you to Dr. Kris Gowen. Thank you.
Thanks for listening, and I have a quick request. We could use your help in getting the word out about the podcast on social media. You can follow us or post about us, and we're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at SciBar Podcast. And it would be super helpful if you would follow us or post about us. If you enjoyed listening to Kris, I want to give a plug for one of her books that is not directly related to sex, but is still super fun all the same. Called One Nation Under Song, it chronicles her quest to sing karaoke in all 50 of the United States, and it's a touching story of working through loss by going on an adventure. I have personally seen Kris sing karaoke in 2 countries outside the US, so she might be working on a new international goal. Anyway, it's a fun book, and I'll put a link for how to find it in the episode notes. If you're near Portland and want to come see an event in person, check out our website for a list of upcoming topics at scienceontaporwa.org, and that last part stands for Oregon and Washington. There's more about our events on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at scienceontaporwa. I want to say a special thanks to Kris, who is one of my many friends and volunteers who has helped me produce these events for a long time. Some other amazing people who help out are Scott Fry, Sam Lauk, Rita Nygren, Steve Perry, and Chris Trone, and these events and podcasts would not happen without them. A special thanks to Graham Tully for audio production and to Chelsea Schuyler for helping keep me sane. Finally, a big thank you to Jonathan Coulton for letting us use his song Mandelbrot Set.
And you're just in time to save the day. Sweeping